You thought their silence meant they stopped caring, but what if distance isn't the absence of feeling, but the way some people protect themselves from it? Welcome to Ghosting Psychology, the space where we break down the hidden emotional patterns behind silence, distance, and withdrawal in relationships. In this video, we're going to explore why someone can hurt you and then disappear, what their silence actually means beneath the surface, and how guilt, fear, and avoidance shape the way they handle emotional connection without ever truly resolving it. When someone pulls away after hurting you, it's easy to treat that distance like a final judgment, like it quietly confirms that what you shared didn't matter enough for them to stay and face it. That reaction makes emotional sense, but it often misses what's actually happening underneath, especially when you're dealing with someone who leans toward avoidant patterns. For someone avoidant, distance is rarely a clean break or a simple lack of feeling. It's not "I don't care," it's closer to a pressure release response. When things become emotionally intense, especially after they've caused harm, their internal system doesn't move toward repair, it moves toward stabilization. The moment they realize they've hurt you is often more destabilizing than it appears from the outside. It's not just guilt in a straightforward sense, it's exposure. It's the sudden awareness that they are now emotionally implicated, that something is expected from them: accountability, repair, emotional presence. And if someone has built their sense of safety around control and emotional distance, that expectation can feel like losing balance. So instead of moving closer, they move away, not because closeness is meaningless, but because closeness now carries weight, responsibility, discomfort, emotional complexity they don't feel equipped to handle in that moment. From the outside, that withdrawal looks like indifference. It looks like they don't care enough to fix what they broke. But internally, it's often an attempt to reduce overwhelm. They're not solving the problem. They're lowering the emotional intensity. Distance becomes a way to breathe again, to feel less flooded, less accountable, less exposed. In their internal logic, stepping back can even feel responsible. Not "I don't care," but "if I stay close, I might make it worse," or "I don't know how to handle this without causing more damage." So withdrawal becomes a kind of self-protection strategy, one that prioritizes immediate emotional relief over repair. That's where the core misunderstanding forms. Because while they experience distance as regulation, you experience it as abandonment. You're left holding the emotional weight of what happened, waiting for acknowledgement, repair, or even just presence that says your experience matters. Instead, you get silence. And silence doesn't land as neutral, it extends the injury. But avoidance isn't designed to repair connection, it's designed to regulate the self. Those two goals don't align. Repair requires engagement, discomfort, accountability, and staying present in emotional tension long enough to work through it. Avoidance, especially in its more automatic forms, prioritizes relief over resolution. So what happens is paradoxical. They step away to feel better internally, but in doing so, they prolong the very rupture they're trying to escape. There's also a deeper layer to this. For many avoidant-leaning people, closeness isn't just intimacy, it's vulnerability plus risk. It includes being seen, being affected, being emotionally responsible for another person's pain. So when they realize they've hurt you, closeness suddenly carries an added meaning: accountability. And if emotional exposure feels unsafe, distance becomes the only tool they trust. But that protective move is miscalibrated, because what they're trying to protect themselves from isn't you, it's their own emotional activation. And ironically, that protection often creates the outcome they fear most: disconnection. The real tragedy here isn't a lack of feeling, it's that feeling alone doesn't translate into repair. They may care, they may feel guilt, they may even think about you repeatedly, but without the capacity to stay in discomfort and act on it, that care doesn't become connection, it stays internal and unexpressed. So you end up in a very specific kind of emotional limbo, someone who may feel something, but whose behavior communicates absence, someone who steps away at exactly the moment closeness is needed most. That mismatch is where confusion builds. This is why distance is so easily misread. It feels like clarity, but it isn't. It's not a statement about your worth or the value of what you shared. It's a statement about how that person handles emotional difficulty. It reflects their capacity for repair, not your significance in their life. Still, understanding the psychology doesn't erase the impact, because even if their withdrawal is rooted in overwhelm or fear, the outcome for you is the same: no repair, no acknowledgement, no resolution. That's where your clarity matters. Understanding why someone distances doesn't mean you're required to stay inside the consequences of it. Intent and impact are not the same thing. Someone can withdraw from fear and still leave you in a situation where your emotional needs go unmet. And that leads to the real question, not why they left emotionally, but what that pattern does to you when it repeats. Do you stay in a space where connection only exists in theory, not in action? Or do you recognize that consistent withdrawal in moments that require repair isn't just a personality quirk, it's a limitation in relational capacity? Because distance that avoids responsibility doesn't resolve anything, it delays it, and delay, repeated enough times, stops being protection and starts becoming loss. Underneath all of this is something less visible, unresolved guilt. Not guilt that leads to repair, but guilt that turns inward. For someone avoidant, guilt often doesn't say, "Fix this." It says, "You are the problem." And that identity, being the cause of someone else's emotional pain, can feel deeply destabilizing. So instead of moving toward repair, they move away from the discomfort of that identity. Not because they're indifferent, but because staying would require tolerating emotional exposure they don't feel capable of holding. From there, distance starts to feel like the safest option. They create internal narratives to justify it. If I go back, I'll make it worse, or they'll never understand, or I can't handle what this will turn into. These narratives aren't usually manipulative, they're protective, but they still function as avoidance. And importantly, guilt doesn't disappear when they withdraw. It often stays active in the background, lingering, resurfacing in quiet moments, reminding them that something remains unresolved. But instead of pulling them back toward repair, it often reinforces the decision to stay away. The pain becomes evidence that they can't handle it, which keeps them stuck in inaction. From your side, that can be deeply confusing because in most emotional frameworks, guilt leads to reconnection. It leads to apologies, conversations, repair attempts. So when none of that appears, it's easy to assume nothing is felt. But often, the issue isn't absence of feeling, it's absence of translation from feeling into action. And that's the key distinction. Relationships aren't sustained by internal emotion alone. They're sustained by behavior that reflects that emotion in real time. Communication, accountability, repair. Without that translation, even strong internal feelings can't stabilize a connection. This is why unresolved guilt can actually be more destabilizing than no guilt at all. No guilt at least offers clarity. Unresolved guilt creates ambiguity. Something is there, but nothing moves. And that ambiguity can keep you emotionally engaged in a situation that is not evolving. You start waiting for signals that never fully arrive. You start interpreting silence, reinterpreting meaning, questioning your own perception. But silence in this context isn't neutral, it's absence of repair. And regardless of the internal state behind it, the lived result is the same. You are left without resolution. So while understanding someone's psychological patterns can bring clarity, it shouldn't override your own needs in the process. Insight is useful, but it isn't meant to replace accountability. Empathy is not meant to cancel out impact. At some point, the explanation matters less than the pattern it creates in your life. And the reality is this: when guilt prevents someone from showing up, from speaking honestly, or from taking responsibility, it stops being something that protects the relationship and starts becoming something that quietly dismantles it. A relationship cannot survive on internal emotion alone. It requires expression, action, and repair. Without that, there is nothing solid to hold on to. At that point, guilt is no longer remorse in any functional sense. It becomes retreat. Not because the feeling isn't real, but because it doesn't translate into anything constructive. And when guilt consistently leads to withdrawal instead of accountability, it stops serving connection and starts replacing it. Once you understand this pattern, how guilt turns inward and distance becomes the default response, another layer becomes visible, and it's often the most confusing one to experience from the outside. Because even in silence, even in distance, the connection doesn't simply vanish for them, it shifts form. This is where a difficult truth needs to be accepted. Someone can miss you and still not return. For most people, missing someone creates movement. It pushes them toward contact, repair, reconnection. It turns feeling into action. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, that internal pull doesn't follow the same path. It stays internal, contained, separated from behavior. They do feel the absence. That part is real. Memories come up. Conversations replay, certain moments resurface with clarity. There is awareness that something meaningful existed, but awareness, on its own, doesn't create movement, because the same system that pushed them into distance is still active. The discomfort with emotional exposure, the fear of responsibility, the uncertainty around repair, it all remains unchanged. So instead of letting longing guide them back, they hold it inside themselves. They don't act on it, they observe it, sit with it, contain it. And over time, something subtle happens. The longing stops functioning as a bridge back to you and starts becoming something more abstract, less relational, more internal. You are no longer experienced as someone to return to, but as a memory to revisit. This is where idealization often begins. When someone is no longer in front of you, the emotional complexity of the relationship naturally softens, the tension fades, the difficult conversations lose their immediacy, and what remains is a simplified emotional imprint, what it felt like at its best, stripped of its full reality. So they may begin to hold on to a version of you that feels meaningful, even significant, not necessarily inaccurate, but incomplete, a version shaped more by memory than by present interaction. But even that doesn't automatically lead them back, because returning would require leaving the internal space where everything is controlled and predictable and stepping back into real emotional consequence, uncertainty, accountability, the possibility of discomfort, and the need to face what was left unresolved. And for someone already managing emotional intensity through distance, that step feels heavier than the longing itself. So they stay where it feels safer, in thought, not in action. And this is where the experience becomes painful for you. Because from your perspective, connection is proven through presence, through communication, through effort, repair, consistency. When those things are absent, the conclusion feels straightforward. You weren't important enough to act on. But the reality is more psychologically complicated. Even if the outcome still feels the same, it's not always a question of importance. It's often a question of capacity. What you represent emotionally may require more regulation, more vulnerability, more accountability than they are currently able to sustain. So instead of meeting that demand, they retreat into a version of the connection that exists without pressure, without obligation, without confrontation. This creates a clear asymmetry. You are living inside the actual relationship. What happened, what hurt, what needs repair. They are living inside an internal representation of it, what they remember, what they feel, what they can manage without emotional overload. Those two realities don't meet. One is grounded in experience, the other is filtered through distance. And memory does something reality cannot. It removes responsibility. It allows emotion without consequence. It allows reflection without repair. But real connection doesn't survive in memory alone. It only stabilizes through participation, through communication, repair, and the willingness to stay engaged when things become uncomfortable. When that participation is missing, the relationship doesn't always end emotionally for both people at the same time, but it does begin to dissolve in lived reality. So you're left in a paradox. Someone who may still think about you, may still feel something, may still recognize your value, and yet remains absent from your life in any meaningful, consistent way. Naturally, the mind tries to resolve that contradiction by assuming that feeling will eventually turn into action, that time, distance, or reflection will eventually push them toward repair. But internal emotion does not automatically convert into external behavior, and without that conversion, nothing changes in a tangible sense, which leads to the core clarity here. You cannot build a relationship on someone's internal experience of you. You cannot sustain emotional security on feelings that are not expressed through action, because what is not acted on does not create stability. It creates ambiguity. And ambiguity, over time, erodes trust. When you put all of this together, the withdrawal after conflict, the guilt that leads to avoidance, the silence that still contains emotion, the internal conflict that never resolves externally, you arrive at the central tension in this dynamic. It is not simply that they leave, it is that they are divided while leaving. One part of them feels connection, care, even longing. Another part experiences that same connection as risk of emotional exposure, responsibility, or loss of control. And instead of integrating those two forces, they separate from them through distance, not because it resolves anything, but because it temporarily reduces internal pressure. The problem is that nothing is actually resolved, it just becomes less visible. So the cycle continues internally, feeling returns, resistance returns, distance returns, and because withdrawal regulates discomfort in the short term, it gradually becomes the default response. From the outside, this looks like inconsistency or mixed signals, but internally it's a loop between desire and avoidance that never reaches synthesis. And this is where misunderstanding happens most often. Because from your perspective, clarity should emerge from care. If someone values you, they move toward you. If they regret something, they repair it. If they feel something, they act on it. But in avoidant dynamics, emotional truth and behavioral truth are not automatically aligned. Someone can feel deeply and still remain still. not because the feeling is absent, but because the system that governs action is built around protection rather than expression. So you end up dealing with someone who is emotionally reactive internally but behaviorally absent externally. And that combination is what makes detachment so difficult. It doesn't give the mind a clean ending. It leaves space for interpretation, for hope, for waiting for alignment that may never come on its own. But here's the part that eventually has to be faced clearly. Internal conflict is not the same as movement. Missing someone is not the same as returning to them. Feeling something is not the same as being able to sustain it in real life. And unless those internal states translate into consistent external action, they cannot form the foundation of a stable connection. Because at the end of it, what you are actually responding to is not just what someone feels, it's what they repeatedly choose to do with what they feel. And if that choice consistently leads to distance, then distance, not potential, becomes the reality you have to relate to. What someone feels internally, guilt, care, longing, or regret, does not create a real relationship unless it is consistently expressed through action. In avoidant patterns, emotional intensity often stays internal while behavior moves toward distance, especially when accountability or vulnerability is required. That creates a painful mismatch. Feelings may still exist, but they don't translate into repair, communication, or presence. Distance, in this context, is not a clear measure of your worth or how much you mattered. It is a reflection of how that person manages emotional discomfort. But even if their feelings are real, feelings alone are not enough to sustain connection. Relationships survive on engagement, accountability, and the willingness to stay present when things become difficult. When someone repeatedly chooses withdrawal instead of repair, the pattern, not the potential, becomes the reality you are dealing with, and waiting for internal emotion to eventually turn into action keeps you attached to uncertainty rather than grounded connection. So the final clarity is simple. You cannot build or maintain a meaningful relationship on unexpressed feelings. You can understand the psychology behind someone's distance, but you cannot let that understanding replace your need for consistency, presence, and emotional reciprocity. At some point, what matters most is not what they feel, but what they are able and willing to do with what they feel, and whether that is enough to sustain a real, stable connection with you. If this helped you see things more clearly, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what we break down next on ghosting psychology. And if this message resonated with you, drop a comment with the word clarity. I want to know who truly understood the depth of this.